Hello, everyone. This is Pharaoh Vincent, and we're going to talk Guild versus Guild today. Of course, for anyone just tuning in, the game is Watcher of Realms, and I want to set up a few expectations ahead of time. All of my experience is going to be within my own account, the state of the game that I am in, but also where I will be going. This is my experience. I've noticed there's a tendency within this game, or at least a lot of the people who create content around this game, that sometimes it's considered to be taboo to speak to having like strong heroes, right? It's usually thrown in as an aside, right? Here is this extremely accessible, free to play, right? We use that term a lot, free to play composition. And exclusively speaking, most of these heroes are not necessarily free to play. Like, I didn't have to spend $20 to get XYZ hero. However, I will admit I am not a free to play player, so we should be really level set there. But also, that's not why I'm making this content. I'm not saying that anyone has to have specific heroes to do things. In fact, there are many heroes that can do many jobs in this game. But I also don't want to intentionally hamstring my own content when it comes to how we're doing things. So, with all of that said, I want to talk about Guild versus Guild, but I really want to talk about more of the upper echelon rather than just the basics. We're going to do what I lovingly referred to as a deep dive. The first of this series is going to be in the tank category. What does a tank bring? What does a tank need? And which tanks are arguably the best? I say arguably because, again, many people can do many jobs. I am not going to say that there are not better options in certain places. With that being said, let's talk tanks. So, tanks, or the defender class, depending on if you want to use the nomenclature within the game, tanks comes from the Holy Trinity, right? For anyone who's never heard the phrase the Holy Trinity, it was kind of popularized by the game World of Warcraft um, and a bunch of other games. I mean, you see it in the games going as far back as the mind can see, basically, where you have a tank or an individual who is meant to hold the attention of the enemy and take in the damage. That is their role. They are meant to mitigate damage. In this case, you want your tanks to be the person who is getting hit. In a guild versus guild setting, this is the person who is going to literally make or break your team. It is their job to stop everyone else from dying. The healer is supposed to keep everyone's hit points up, but it is not their job to stop everyone from dying. This is the difference between a tank and a healer in my own vernacular. So, what does that look like? I'm just going to pull up a random record. And we're going to look at this particular individual. And we're going to define who he has as a tank. So this is Killer 2 in my alliance. His tank of choice is Brokir. He is, of course, one of those top choices. We will talk about Brokir in detail. In this case, his opponent is going to attempt to kill him. That's what these guys are meant to do. If Brokir does not die, then he has done his job. The idea of sneaking these guys past here is so that you can bypass the tank, which he kind of did for a second, in order to get to the juicy, low hit points, easy to kill targets. And even in this video, for that briefest of moments when they got him past, he almost got his goal. Praetus and Valkyria. Or Valkyria? I don't know. He almost got him. He did really good. But it wasn't enough, because his tank held the majority of damage back. Without a tank, Valkyria would have instantly died to those particular cultists. I've heard people call them assassins and a bunch of other things. I don't even know what their real name is. I just refer to them as the crazy dagger chicks. They hit hard. They use magic damage. That's why they hit hard. And magic defense is very rare in this game. Ironically, Brokir is one of the few that has it. And so you can understand why that's important. So again, he would have instantly died without a tank. You can kind of see this. We're going to do this a lot over the next few minutes. I'm not going to try to find a video for each tank, but rather talk to you about kind of your top options. And the man on screen is actually one of those options. The reason being is a good tank in this particular game, in Watcher of Realms, has what a lot of people refer to as an immunity, or a second life. So when their life would be depleted, in this case, I love how it says when Regulus's hit points drop below 10%, but it could technically, like, with however much hit points he has, right? He has right now, I'm not going to do the math. Don't do that while we're recording. 103,227 hit points. Somebody could hit him for 103,228. He still will not die. His immunity will go off. So it doesn't really state that, because when he drops below 10% or fatal damage, he becomes immune to all damage for 9 seconds. I don't even have him fully skilled up. He's still really good, because 9 seconds is more than enough time for me to top him off. Right? This is what a tank does. There are other ways to mitigate damage, but your best options have a mixture of crowd control and a second life. With one exception, but we're going to talk about that exception in a minute. Now, from the legendary category of second life tanks, you also have Brokir, who you just saw. And he has, again, when receiving fatal damage for the first time, gain freeze and become immune for, you guessed it, 10 seconds. Guess what? The next one. Toreador. Receives damage, restoring 100% life. It doesn't tell you, but it has around an 8-second animation, which during that time he is still immune to damage, so it's not that bad. I will say, of the legendary tanks, he is the least tanky, but arguably the most useful because of his faction being Nightmare. Nightmare units are generally always good. Most of them are like at least in the middle of the pack, and it's really easy to build a decent Nightmare composition with a few key heroes that you cannot replace, right? Toreador is one of those. You cannot replace Toreador with any Nightmare unit and have it function the same. Like, he is bounds above any other Nightmare tank, but also any other Nightmare unit in the tanking role, if this makes sense. Because there's like Abomination, who's a fighter, but Toreador is still better at tanking than Abomination ever will be. This is my point. This does come down to Baron, who is the close second and is a Nightmare tank. The reason being is he is also unyielding, which is kind of like saying he doesn't die. It's funny because sometimes they say, when receiving fatal damage, they become immune. And sometimes they said unyielding. It doesn't really matter because guess what? It works. It just works. They just stay alive. Guess what? 8 seconds, approximately the same as Toreador. Again, give or take. I haven't fully mathed out the animation, but you get the idea. So these are, pound for pound, some of the best tanks, right? These 3 plus Baron, these 4 tanks do make up an extremely solid choice. There is one person who's arguably better than them, depending on how you use him, and depending on how much you've skilled him up, and whether or not he's actually the Lord or not. And that is Cyrus. Cyrus shares damage with his... this one. Cyrus shares damage with the skeletons. When you get this skilled up, this can go up to a grand total of 60%. And you can't kill him as long as there's a skeleton alive. So if you can get his extremely cheap ultimate down to really cheaper, get a little bit of rage regeneration, and you had that, he's really almost unkillable. It's really hard to kill a Cyrus who is built correctly. Also, facing matters. How you position a Cyrus matters more than the other tanks. So he requires some nuance, but if you use him right, no one's really gonna ever be able to kill the Cyrus. They're just gonna have to figure out a way around them. And that's kind of my point there, right? There are tanks that don't have it directly, but indirectly they do. So that is Cyrus. Now, I have other favored tanks, and generally the second best way to mitigate damage is to prevent it from ever happening in the first place. The easiest way to do that is, I don't know, inflicting a 5-second freeze every couple of seconds, because this is so cheap, guys. Like, 900 rage is not that much, and especially if you really start to look at this man's stats, because he has 12 rage regen when attacked, 14 auto, and 4 basic. He gains rage so fast if he's actually tanking. It is not even real. Yes, he has a 900 cost ult. However, he gets rage from like 900 sources very quickly. It is pretty crazy. To compare that to, I don't know, Cyrus, who we were just talking about, right? His rage regen attack is 6. His basic attack is higher at 8. So again, we're doing great there. We're cooking. But, like, that is a very big difference. And for somebody who's meant to be attacked, you can kind of see why that 14 really adds up very quickly. And in the right kinds of setups, he's basically unkillable, especially if you can get it from another source like a healer or a DPS. And we'll talk about those in their own videos, because we have to break out those kinds of support roles. But tanks are pretty straightforward. Meaty boys who take damage. Again, Crodor I like to talk about too, just because he also has a stun when his hit points drop low. My only issue is it doesn't happen frequently enough for me to really be like, oh my god, this is amazing. Because it can only be triggered once per deployment. I just don't see a reason why this is better than what we need. The thing with Crodor, though, is he does absolutely get thick. You want to build him with max defense anyways, because of his passive and his damage scaling off defense. Sure, he can deal a little bit of damage, but any of the tanks that scale off of defense, generally speaking, have an advantage, which is they can deal a little bit of damage, but they're also really hard to kill. Defense in this game is not a dumb stat. Do not consider it that way. And so the defense scaling tanks are generally your best second tanks, although you can argue that somebody like a Reeve is not bad, because again, he has a lot of those crowd controlling stuns, right? A 1-second stun every single time he attacks adds up quickly. So, again, the best ways to mitigate damage. Don't take it in the first place. When you do die, get back up. And in general, just be meaty does do a lot. But that kind of gets us into a very quick thing about tank gear, specifically, in Watcher of Realms. Because I can tell you, okay, yes, use these tanks, they good. And a lot of people can go with that, woohoo. But there's an absolute wrong way to build a tank. And that is to go, this is a Toreador, I'm going to click that button. Because this build for a Toreador will die in exactly 2 hits. Maybe 3. I imagine they'll get hit for about 35 to 40,000 damage because only having 5,000 defense in Guild versus Guild will get you killed very quickly. I'm pretty sure Quick Equip only got the 2 pieces, right? So, hey, yeah, we got a Mortal Warrior. These aren't even the best ones I have for this, but that's okay. And then, oh, hey, a crit rate Bengal, that's great. Attack speed, yeah, that doesn't help us. And, I mean, I guess you got the hit point bonus this time. Good on you. That's just not gonna work, right? You really do need to manually equip your tanks for Guild versus Guild. So what are you looking for? In this order, and I do say in this order, and by the way, this is true for both defense scaling and anyone else. Always hit point bonus first. Always defense bonus second. If it's a weapon, you can go with hit points next, and preferably defense. And guess what? That is a better piece than what Quick Equip found. Now, when it comes to the chest piece, it already has hit points, so you get rid of that. This is a Toreador. I could see you wanting some haste, right? Attack speed. I don't have anything right now. It's on somebody else, I think. I could see you wanting some rage regen. I don't see anything there either. Attack bonus, maybe? Nah, it's fine. What is this? That works. Basically what you can do. Because really, again, you want hit point bonus, defense, flat defense for the particular chest piece, and again, you get your set bonus because you want that 25%. That's basically like a whole extra piece of gear. So, the next piece of this that you really want to key in on is going to be your right side gear. And so this is similar, although I personally am a little more fluid on it, but I will explain why in a little bit. It depends on how good your set is, but ideally you want Tempered Will. My good Tempered Will set, I think, is on Regulus right now because he was just geared out for GVG, but we'll talk about that set. It's not perfect, but it does illustrate some stats, right? Hit point bonus main stat is ideal, although if it has defense bonus and it rolls with a hit point bonus substat, you're fine. I love rage regeneration on a tank, and I love attack speed on a tank with crowd control, like a Toreador. So this piece would be perfect for Toreador if I was currently using him in Guild versus Guild. I'm not, but if I was, it would be perfect. This is where things get a little weird. I actually don't know why he has attack speed. Oh, that's why, because this one wasn't that great. So again, hit points, defense, wasted. But I don't want my Toreador to die, so cheers. This isn't terrible, because it does at least have the defense and hit points with some attack speed. Like I said, with a Toreador who has a chance to stun on his... There it is. Auto attacks, right? So a 30% chance to stun every time he attacks. it's alright. Also, I don't like this. The trigger chance increases. By how much? We'll get into that later. So again, hit points are defense. You want the other one back down here. And then set really does matter. Ideally, tempered will. And this is my worst piece of tempered will, but that's okay. I haven't been lucky to get a lot of the other ones. The other viable sets, unshaken will. This gives you a... well, I should talk about the subs for both. The reason why tempered will is the best is because it gives damage reduction of 15% flat out, which is wonderful. Do not underestimate what 15% damage reduction is. It's basically you take their damage, you multiply it by 0.85. Congratulations, they are now dealing less damage. For each enemy blocked, increases defense by 5%, stacking up to 4 times. With a Bastion Ring, every tank will have... I don't think there's any defender that doesn't have 3 block base. So with a Bastion Ring, you're good to go. And right now my Torador doesn't have one because, again, he's not in Guild versus Guild, but you get the idea. Every tank in Guild versus Guild needs a Bastion Ring. Congratulations, that's easy. You could argue, and I have equipped Goddess's Grace early on when I didn't have a lot of Bastion Rings, but now that I do, I use it for defense-based tanks every so often. But that's kind of the gearing setup you want for all of your tanks. Ideally, you want your hit points to be well over 90,000. And ideally, you want your defense to be over 8,000 plus. I would argue even higher. This is not an ideal setup. I have too many hit points, not enough defense. In my humble opinion, right? I wouldn't want this particular character to go into Guild versus Guild with this exact setup because I feel like it would just set him up for failure. Hey all, this is post-production Vincent, and I realized while talking about the tank gear in the original footage, I ADHD'd the other 2 sets, and kind of their benefits for tanks. The good news is it's fairly straightforward. Really and truthfully, the best sets for tanks are going to be your Tempered Will. That is the best. The third best is going to be the Unshaken Will. And again, it kind of gives hit points and recovers hit points every time they're attacked, once every 5 seconds. This isn't as good as it sounds. The main reason behind that is generally in Guild versus Guild, when you are going to kill a tank, you're just going to overwhelm it, right? And so you're going to drop 4 different sources of damage. So you're looking at, a 4,500 to 5,000 point heal once every 5 seconds while 4 things are hitting it, right? Doesn't really add up to all that much, whereas even just a base Guardian set reduces the damage taken by 15%. So if you're looking at 30k hits, which are pretty common, right? Each hit would reduce by approximately 3,000 is 10%, and then add another half, so 1,500. So you're looking at about 4,500 per hit. But since there's 4 targets, it will easily overpower the other set because, again, if you're dropping 4,500 damage 4 times versus once, it adds up much faster to being better. So that's why you'll see that a lot of my tanks generally are going to be in Guardian sets or Tempered Will if at all possible, because that passive 15% damage reduction is the best point to have it for. You don't really need the extra hit points. There's only one exception that I would make to that, though, and that is if you're going to use a Jira to tank. And the reason being is Jira can get to some crazy high hit point totals with her ultimate. So between the ultimate and the set, right, I think I've gotten Jira up over 300k hit points. That right there, I mean, 300k, you're looking at a 16,000 point heal once every 5 seconds. That one's pretty significant. And the reason why that's about equal to, because I'm not going to say it's better than the other set. The reason I'd say it's about equal to that kind of a set is only because the most things in this game attack once every 3 times with great crowd control and things like that. Generally, you're not going to get hit every 3 seconds. On top of that, if you kill a few targets, right, as it tapers down, the effectiveness doesn't go away. Whereas with the Guardian set, right, it's only as effective as how many sources of damage are coming in at your tank. But again, I'd still recommend for 99.99999% of use cases, go with the Guardian or the Tempered Will. So, anyways, back to the original scheduled program. And you'll notice that a little bit, right? The more you kind of work through some of these heroes, the more you're going to see that doesn't really hold up that well, right? If I put the pieces back onto Reggie Boy over here, that's probably why I put that other piece on. I am cresting that 8,000 because he is a slightly better tank than Torador. Torador's base defense is a little lower, and so therefore he doesn't scale as much off defense, which means you need to build more defense into Torador in order to make him a bona fide tank. There's actually a few fighters with close to as much defense as him, if I remember correctly, or at least 1 or 2. I think Jira's pretty close, if I remember right, but not that close. But you kind of get the idea. There's a lot of characters in the game that are fairly tanky that aren't tanks. Right? I'll start clicking through a few of them. Does he get tanky? No. Surprisingly tanky. People sleep on how tanky she can get. Right? Even King Hars, who's flimsy, has about as much defense as him. Okay, yeah, that was the other one I thought might. So, anyways, long story short, hit points, defense, those are generally the best bets. And then you really want to go with flat stats beyond that for hit points and defense if you can. Because you don't need your tanks really doing much else. In the instance of like a Torador, you could argue for a little bit of attack speed. I'd be fine with that, sure. But don't try to make your tanks deal damage in Guild versus Guild. It's not worth it. At all. Don't do it. So, we'll talk about placement in future videos, because we're going to be going into a whole series of this. But that is the tanks, what they do, how they do it, and what you need to make them successful. So as always, if you like this kind of content, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out a lot. I'll see you on the next one.